the focus of our presentation today, is getting to know the English language, or at least American English, in some more detail. And that's really what's at the heart of this particular project. So let me just take a moment to put this PowerPoint presentation up here and get started with that. We also have some sounds that will play. My speaker is not too incredibly massive and robust, but for a little tiny thing, it actually puts off a pretty good sound. You'll be surprised. So so the project that we are talking about today is actually, it started out with a very specific focus on southwestern Illinois, but through time we hope to branch out geographically and look at variation in American English, not just in southwestern Illinois, but how that compares to the state of Illinois in general, and also how what we find in this region compares to, say, what we find when you cross the river into St. Louis and the greater St. Louis area, the city as well as the surrounding counties. But this project has really only been going on for a year now, and believe it or not, a year is not a whole lot of time. It's just enough time to start to get an emerging picture of this immediate area. So our other project supervisor can't be here today, Dr. Larry LaFawn. He's actually an associate dean at SIUE, and he's in all kinds of dean meetings today, so he can't be here to talk about the project. But we can just start out with a basic question to kind of get us oriented to the topic. And that basic question is, well, what is a dialect anyways? And, well, I don't know, what is a dialect? Let's kind of get some ideas here, and then we can go with that. What is a dialect?
A variation.
A variation. Okay, yeah. A lot of times people will say a dialect is like what that guy over there has, but not me. Oftentimes we get that kind of first response. A kind of more formal definition, a definition that allows us to start kind of asking some other types of questions in our project, is that a dialect is a way of comparing language use, so language variation, based on ways that the words or the vocabulary will change, pronunciations will change, and also larger grammatical patterns, the way that people form sentences, for example, will change. So those are three kind of basic areas that people concentrate on when they're thinking about dialects. And the take-home message, I hope that one of the take-home messages from this presentation today is actually we all speak a dialect. It's not just Southerners or people from New York City or people from LA that speak dialects. We all speak dialects. So as I mentioned before, one way to start to appreciate how even a single language like English can vary from one place to the next, or across one population to the next, or across one age group to the next, is to think about the words that people like to use. So I don't know, in this room, just kind of a straw poll or a hand poll, how many of you prefer pop as the answer to this question? Who uses pop? Chicago. Yeah, you have to be up in Cook County, Lake County, those areas, if you're from Chicago. And it really doesn't take too long as you go southward before you stop hearing pop and you start hearing soda. So how many of you prefer that as the generic response? And then maybe you make your choice. Yeah, I want a Diet Coke or something like that. Yeah, so that tends to be the most common response. I'm originally from New England. Soda was also our default choice. But when I was a kid, I also heard an alternative being used, which was tonic. Tonic was the generic term for soda, but that's kind of gone away. I don't hear it much anymore, so that seems to be dying out. Yeah, another option is sody. And then some combination of pop plus soda, like soda pop, for example, although that one is a little bit more restricted. And then another generic answer is Coke, and I wonder where you might hear that being heard. Yeah, as you go way to the true south, the far south. So you go to a diner or a restaurant, what do you have to drink? Coke. Okay, what kind would you like to drink? I'll have a Mr. Pibb or something like that, or a Dr. Pepper. Yeah, so that's the generic term. And then other options from there. Another way that we think of dialects is pronunciations and accents. Just kind of call out, how would you pronounce the word for the person who's your mother's sister? I heard somebody say it wrong. Who was that? So, who's the aunt sayer? Where are you from originally?
This area.
This area. Okay, that's very interesting because, yeah, overwhelmingly we get A-U-N-T rhyming with A-N-T around here. So the little critter, and there's no meaning relationship there, so, but it's just that they sound the same. These are what we might call homophones. I'm from New England, again, as I said before, and I said aunt. So I have an Aunt Brenda and an Uncle Bob. So it seems to be the case that in the more northern reaches of the country, so Wisconsin, Minnesota, and also the New England states, you hear aunt more, and as you head further south, you start to hear aunt be used more. Here's another example, historically really particular to St. Louis, but perhaps around here a bit too. This is something we're trying to learn more about. But it's not even found amongst all people from St. Louis anymore, just a small subset of people. The stuff that you would have with ice cream and chocolate syrup or strawberry syrup was pronounced as sundae. So we have a kind of phonetic transcription here. So I'm going to have an ice cream sundae. But that doesn't mean you go to church on Sunday. You go to church on Sunday. So whereas in other parts of the country, again, where I come from, you would have an ice cream sundae and you go to church on Sunday. Is there anyone here who prefers sundae as the pronunciation of the word? Yeah, so that one seems to be going away, but when we were giving our lifelong learning presentation a few weeks back in Edwardsville, we came across people who preferred sundae. That was still their pronunciation.
Does this have any relationship to who settled an area first and how their vowels are pronounced?
Absolutely. I mean, the longer term history, and we'll get to this a little bit later as well, has to do with migration histories. This is a lot of times where dialect patterns start to show their differences. And then over time, other things start to factor in. People cluster into particular types of community groups, and certain dialect properties are emphasized or others fade away or blend away. Yeah. And then another common feature particular to St. Louis is what we call the merger of certain types of vowels or consonant sounds. So the or and the r have merged. So you hear people say, oh yeah, just take the I party far into the town, or Forest Park rather than Forest Park or 44. And that's a very particular pronunciation pattern to St. Louis in general. So. And then finally, an example of grammar. We'll be coming to southwestern Illinois in particular in just a minute. You get these types of grammatical variations. Sometimes people think of this as wrong or mistakes. But the problem with calling this bad grammar is that when you get large groups of people who agree on doing this in the way that they use everyday language, it's not that an entire community is making a mistake. This is simply a way of using language that's typical then for that grouping in kind of casual everyday language use. And then when people go to school and they learn about expository writing, there are certain prescriptive rules they learn to follow. But that can sometimes be quite different from what you hear when people are just using language to interact with each other on a regular day-to-day basis. So you get this kind of verb difference where the committee are meeting tomorrow versus the committee is meeting tomorrow. And conceptually, sometimes people are thinking of the committee as one body, and other times people think of the committee as a collection of individuals. And so that may motivate this difference in the verb here. Another example that we find is this kind of ain't negative word. Again, people mock it a lot, but people also use it. It's all over the place. So, people may say, oh, that's bad grammar. Yet again, ain't is a very prevalent, huge part of the way that many American English speakers use their grammar. Another one we come across is what we call this prefixing of an vowel. It doesn't happen on all verbs. It happens only on some verbs. So I'm a comin', I'm a goin', but you often don't hear people use the a prefix, for example, like I'm a playing tennis or something like that. So it's very specific to the types of verbs that it applies to. And then another typical example that Dr. LaFond says he hears a lot around here is this preposition that comes at the end of a sentence sometimes. So people, rather than people saying like, where are you, they'll say, where are you at? Yeah, and that shows up a lot too in certain types of populations. So, this is just, I just want to show you a couple of maps, and then I'm going to be turning the floor over to Lara to talk about this for a couple of minutes. But this is just one way that people who study dialect variation are known as dialectologists after. So these are linguists who make it their life's work really to interview large groups of people. We didn't make this map. This, this is not our research. This is somebody else's map. and to kind of go around across regions, work with people from different age groups, different socioeconomic groups, gender groups, race groups, you name it, a degree of formal education, and find out how they use their language on a regular basis, and try to see if you can kind of get some regional patterns starting to pop up. So this map is actually kind of looking at a whole lot of stuff. It's looking at whether or not you say aunt as aunt or aunt, and how you pronounce the word caught. Is it caught or quat? And so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things being kind of surveyed in this map. And this is kind of a nationwide picture. Based on these types of properties, this is one, the map's a little bit washed out on the screen, but these are some of the original dialect boundary lines that were drawn for the United States. So you see kind of New England in the upper right-hand corner. Imagine a map of the US kind of superimposed over this. And then New York is its own dialect area, and then you have the Great Lakes area, and the X in the middle is where St. Louis is. So that gives you some perspective. So based on this map, we are said to be part of the Midland, but it doesn't make a distinction between what goes on in St. Louis versus what goes on in Illinois. It kind of assumes that that's all one homogeneous dialect grouping. And then you don't go too far south, maybe into Kentucky and Tennessee before you get to what is called the Mountain Southern. And then the coastal Southern is further south, but again, that lumps all of the Southern dialects together. And if any of you have traveled through like Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, that is a Southern region, but those Southern dialects sound quite different from each other, from one state to the next as well. And then note Western, all the way to the west, with nothing else to be said about it from there. And that has to do with the fact that historically there have not been large population settlements in the West. And that you also had other factors for Western settlement. You had migration northward from Latin America and other types of huge geographic gaps between larger communities. And then also there just wasn't a lot of dialect study going on in the western part of the US, but that's changing through time. We're starting to get more data coming in on that part. This is a slightly more sophisticated map that starts to make more dialect boundary divisions. So you start to see the Ozark dialect grouping popping up as different from what's known as the South Midland in this map. And we start to see an Appalachian dialect grouping emerge here. The East Coast is now quite finely divided. You see lots and lots of different dialect groupings, and if any of you have been up and down the East Coast before, what you hear in New England is quite different from the Mid-Atlantic, for example, and also compared to the East Coast South. As you get down into the Carolinas, things are quite different there. So this is a little bit more detailed, and then you can kind of go overboard. Here's an example of somebody who's really trying to capture every single layer of dialect variation, and it really starts to get almost confusing to look at. Again, the little X in the middle, if you can even see it anymore, it's right next to the red word that says Midland. That's St. Louis. And one of the interesting things about the St. Louis area and Madison County and St. Clair County and the counties immediately surrounding that is note that that X is right at the bottom of what looks like a little peninsula that shoots down from the Great Lakes. This is known as the I-55 corridor. And this is the idea that really this area represents the southern reaches of northern Midland American dialect features, that you have people from Chicago, Milwaukee, those areas who have gradually moved and migrated southward following the path of what is now the I-55, which was always an important route anyways, even before it became an interstate. And so that's why people claim that St. Louis has a real mixture then of northern features as well as southern features. It's a real kind of mix-mash of dialect properties, and that's the reason why. Other people, though, are claiming that, especially as you get over the river into Madison County and St. Clair counties in particular, those are said to represent areas, represent the most northern reaches of southern Illinois. So what you might hear in the Little Egypt area, the Cairo metropolis area, starts to reach up to the northern fringes of St. Clair County and Madison County. The real issue, though, is that nobody really knows. Up until our project, nobody's ever systematically studied dialect variation on this side of the river in this region of the state. There have been tons of studies done on Chicago, tons of studies done on St. Louis City proper, but very little, if nothing, done on southwestern Illinois. And so that's where our project comes in. And that's where I'm going to turn the floor over to Laura for a couple of minutes, and then I'll finish things off at the end. So, yeah.
Okay, so our research that we're doing, we are looking at the 3 areas of language that Christine mentioned before. We're looking at the grammar, the vocabulary, and the pronunciation. We've been conducting interviews with people and sit down face-to-face where we record the interviews and we can get that pronunciation data that we need to. But we also have a website. It's called IllinoisDialects.com, and this is it actually right here. And our entire survey is on there. So the grammar and the vocabulary portion of our survey, you can go to this website, you can sign up to become a member, you can read about what we're doing. Yeah, it's free. And then you can actually take the survey as well.
And that's data for us. That helps contribute to our project. So if you're ever feeling bored someday, or if you're procrastinating some actual work you're supposed to be doing, go to our webpage instead and take our survey. And I think that next slide, actually.
Here's where you can take the survey. But we do also like to sit down. So even if you take the survey, you can leave your email address and we can contact you to do a sit-down interview.
With a recording. There's no way to record you online, but we can come find you with our tape recorders and record you then.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're finding in our survey and the information that we're collecting. So these are some of the questions that we've asked on our survey. So the first one, gas is so expensive anymore that I hardly ever completely fill my tank. So we're looking at that use of anymore.
Yeah, our grammar guru is Dr. LaFawn, and he's not here today, so there's not a whole lot that we'll say about this slide, but he's noticed a trend that this anymore is used in these types of circumstances, and he's wondering if this is particular to this region of the country. He seems to hear it a lot in passing conversations with people, so he decided to kind of more systematically test whether or not, I don't, do any of you in here ever hear it or use it yourselves? Remember, we're not worried about like what's prescriptively proper. We're worried about what people do. We want to know what people are doing on a regular basis, everyday basis. So is that not really a familiar? Do you hear other people using that one? So, you know, not the whole sentence, but this use of anymore in particular. So.
If you look at the third one, whenever I graduated high school last year, that one we've kind of had mixed feelings about.
Yeah, I have a student of my SIUE, and she said that, like, whenever I saw my husband yesterday. So she's using whenever for a very particular specific time period, whereas my understanding of whenever is a kind of vaguely defined time period or something that can happen over and over again. So again, there's this idea that people in this region are using whenever to refer to one specific event that happened at one point in the past. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard other people using whenever in that way.
A lot of people have said that the use of whenever just means the same as when in that situation.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, are you coming with? Have you heard that before? We hear that that's more of a Chicago, people keep telling us it's more of a Chicago thing. Oh, they say that in Chicago.
I also feel like if you are in a region with a heavy German ancestry, though, this is a very German, this is exactly the same grammatical structure this would be uttered in German. Kommst du mit is in German meaning, are you coming with me? But it actually is coming you with. So I wonder if its presence in this part of the country in particular owes something to German ancestry. So, because we would never say that in New England. It would, you know, not that we think it's wrong or bad, it's just unheard of. It would be a strange utterance. So.
And then where are you at? I actually thought this one was weird being on our survey because I say that all the time. I'm from Florissant.
And I don't have a dialect
all the time. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is more our territory, vocabulary, pronunciation.
So we looked at a lot of different vocabulary choices. We didn't ask people, we're not looking for a correct answer, it's just whatever people use. So this data, we didn't add anything to this.
No,
this is from about 30 people that we interviewed in the beginning.
And this is not our map.
Yeah, this is not our map. This is going back to that pop, soda, Coke thing. So if you look at the area in red, that would be the Coke, where people say Coke. The greenish, it's a different color. The greenish area is soda, and then the blue area is pop. So somebody mentioned earlier about, well, does what people say or how people speak have to do with the history of the area? So why do you think that in the South people would say Coke?
It's Coca-Cola's headquarters in Atlanta.
Yeah, because Coca-Cola's headquarters were in the South, right? And what about pop? in the north. Does anybody know where pop comes from?
It's history.
It was the name or the sound that was made. Soda used to come with
those,
the cork.
Yeah, and those original corks were produced and made and used mostly in the northern central part of the country. So it has to do with the sound it made. Yeah.
And then what about soda in this area? Does anybody know where the word soda comes from?
Yes, the old soda fountains.
It actually comes.
Soda water.
CO2?
It actually comes from seltzer water, which is German. It comes from German influence, which actually makes sense of why we would say soda in this area, because there's such a German heritage here. So, and then
Yeah, Seltzer, soda, and then it's just kind of become more anglicized
They
over
don't call
time.
it that anymore, though. That's an
What do they call it? They just would say Coke, I think, now. I'm trying to think of what people say in Germany.
They don't drink plain water.
No, they drink sparkling water, Seltzer Wasser, yeah. So now we drink it with lots of sugar and flavor in it, yeah. So that's how we like it, so, and caffeine.
So there is a lot of different factors that come into play, where the words are coming from, the history of the area, but there is some kind of sense that's made when you put things into a map like this. Okay, so looking at some of our results that we've got, and this was one of our questions, was what is the generic term used to call a carbonated sweet beverage, for example, enjoyed with a burger and fries?
And it's not beer.
Right. And everybody that we interviewed said soda, except for one person who's from Jackson County, which if you look back at this map, is in the very southern tip of Illinois, where
you start to
people
see the
say
red
Coke.
creeping in the southern tip of Illinois because it's taking on southern features there, yeah.
So he moved to Madison County later in life, and he brought this term with him.
Yeah, he never let go of it.
What do you call the device that provides drinking water with the push of a button, usually found in an office, hallway, or at a gymnasium? Water fountain. So overwhelmingly we have water fountain or drinking fountain, some combination of something fountain. And then we had one person say water cooler.
Yeah, from Belleville.
Yeah. And we're not really sure where that came from.
Yeah, because other people from Belleville said fountain or water fountain or drinking fountain. Now I'm from New England. Do you know what I say? I don't say any of those. I call it the bubbler. Drink from the bubbler. Yeah. So and again, I like to use that one because most people look at me like I just stepped off of an alien spacecraft. Yeah. So yeah, quite different. This one is a fun one to do. Yeah.
What do you call a miniature lobster that lives in freshwater lakes and or streams? The crawfish. Yeah, crawfish, crawdad, crayfish was kind of the answer we got most. I think some of the variation that we had where we had one person answer something else was because the picture that we had kind of, some people were maybe confused.
Some people thought it looked like a shrimp or something like that. And tragically, we're finding a lot of like 20-somethings who have absolutely no idea what it is because they don't go outside and they live in kind of very developed areas, so they've never seen one before. And they just have no history with it, so we don't know is the answer then, or no answer. Yeah. Yeah, okay, and then I'll take it over. And this is kind of the last segment of this presentation, and then I'll wrap it up. So we've talked a little bit about grammatical variation and vocabulary variation. A third way, again, to look at this particular region is sound variation. And when you start to think about sound variation, you really have to get very micro level. Very nitpicky, are you talking about how vowels vary or how consonants vary? You really aren't just looking at like how the entire word varies. You're getting inside of the word and looking at pronunciation variation. And so one of the best ways to do that with American English is to think about vowel sound variation. For example, if you're going to look at British English variation, you can look at consonant variation because in some dialects of British English, people will say something like think with a TH, and other parts of England they'll say think, I think, with an F sound. And that's a kind of regional variation in England. But really in American English, it's the vowels that change from one region to the next. And in particular, one type of vowel that people like to study is what's known as the low back vowels in American English. And I'll kind of tell you a little bit about that. This is what makes the words COT and CAUGHT sound different for some parts, for speakers from some parts of the US. So in some parts of the US, these words don't sound different from each other. For example, one may sound like caught, and the other one might sound more like what. And I have actually one person who keeps that distinction. Terry Gross is a radio personality from NPR. She does a show called Fresh Air where she interviews celebrities, and I got a recording of her, if this will work, saying D-O-N and then D-A-W-N. And you should be able to kind of hear a difference in the pronunciation of these two words if these sound files work.
Dandalillo, Dandalillo.
So that's her saying D-O-N.
Dandalillo, the new film Rescue Dawn.
And that's Dawn, D-A-W-N.
The new film Rescue Dawn.
So I know the speaker's not fantastic, but hopefully you can kind of hear that a bit.
Dandalillo, the new film Rescue Dawn. The new film Rescue Dawn.
So she's saying more like dawn, dawn. And I'm kind of playing it up a little bit so that you hear that difference as well. But in other parts of the country, these are homophones. These are words that sound exactly the same. It's hard to get sound recordings of this because there just haven't been a lot of studies done on these vowels in the Midwestern part of the country. I found some sound data from a man from Western Pennsylvania. So in Eastern Pennsylvania, the vowels are different, but as you get towards Pittsburgh, the vowels have merged for those speakers. So this isn't the best sound quality, but let's see.
6 times the cost of, 6 times the cost of,
Where he's saying cost.
6 times the cost of, 6 times the cost of,
And now washed, which should sound different, will sound the same. The vowel will sound the same.
and washed her face, and washed her face, and washed her face. 6 times the cost of, and washed her face.
Yeah, so these, it goes by relatively quickly. And in fact, just kind of listening to this, you're like, well, whatever you say, lady, I guess they sound the same, or I guess they sound different. And that's why just listening to these sounds, you don't get a clear sense of whether or not they've merged or not. Other similar word types are, this is what's known as the low back vowel merger. So dawn and dawn become similar, walk and walk become homophones, holler, holler become homophones in other parts of the country. And so really this is, and actually I'll show you how we measure this. In St. Louis, despite the larger merger phenomenon in most of the country, there's evidence that in St. Louis the vowels have remained distinct. So it's kind of an island of vowel distinctness amongst a sea, Midwestern sea of vowel mergers. Tiffany Majors is somebody who studied this a few years ago, and she found that the A words like C-A-U-G-H-T are pronounced differently, with the tongue more kind of centered in the middle of the mouth. And the O words like C-O-T are pronounced with the tongue pulled further back in the mouth. And how do you do this? Basically through the magic of computer software, you can take recordings. This is why we record people when we interview them. And you can filter out particular frequencies, kind of acoustic information, sound wave information, and actually measure where the tongue is in the mouth when people are pronouncing these words. And so the clear circles are somebody saying words like C-O-T and their tongue is pulled further back. This is a speaker from St. Louis. And the C-A-U-G-H-T words are, this speaker is saying them with their tongue pushed further forward. And there's really no reason why they should pronounce these vowels as differently, except they just do. This is just a feature of English as it's spoken around St. Louis. And so our question was, well, what's happening on this side of the river in southwestern Illinois? Do we see that distinction of vowels carrying over? Why not? Geographically, we're quite close to St. Louis. Or do we see part of the trend of what's happening in the Midwest as a whole? And so, we recorded a bunch of words like these from our 30 speakers. So we got caught, C-A-U-G-H-T, wash, haul, dog, log, foggy, so on and so forth. And I did that very same kind of computer analysis. And this is basically what we found. So these, again, are people from southwestern Illinois. For many of the people we recorded, there is no distinction like you see for St. Louis. All of those vowels are clustered together in a central part of the mouth. So it looks like, despite the fact that in St. Louis, where the vowels remain separate, on this side of the river, the vowels are merging, just like they are in the rest of the Midwest. So all you have to do is cross one geographic boundary, namely the Mississippi River, or the Missouri River, depending on where you are, and suddenly your dialect changes and you're participating in a more Midwestern phenomenon. So this is a woman who was born and raised. We get people who are born and raised here. So this isn't a woman who just moved to Edwardsville from Ohio or something. These are people who are lifelong residents here. But for a couple of speakers, though, we do see the distinction being maintained. So here's somebody from Macoupin County and also somebody from St. Clair County. And we do see some more kind of fronting and backing of the vowels, although it's a flipped situation. So this suggests perhaps that the vowels are on the move with these speakers, and there's going to be quite a lot of variation in terms of how these are pronounced. Interestingly, however, though, even when there is no front-back distinction for these types of vowels, certain words can remain different in their pronunciation. So we came across a few speakers who, even though their vowels are all right in the middle of their mouth for these low back vowels, specific words do sound different. And I'll play these last couple of sounds for you, and then we'll close the presentation today. Here's a female who is from Madison County. And so listen to her saying C-A-U-G-H-T and then saying C-O-T.
Caught, caught, caught.
And now C-O-T.
Caught, caught, caught.
Do those sound different to you? They sound the same. Here's a female from, from Alton, who's going to say C-A-U-G-H-T 3 times and then C-O-T. She's a little bit quieter, I think, so you have to listen a little more.
Caught, caught, caught. Caught, caught, caught.
Do those sound different to you? Do those sound a little bit more? And then here's a young male from Macoupin County, but his vowels are different too, but they're in different places of the mouth than the two females are, so he's flipped his vowels.
Caught, 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 caught.
So his C-O-T almost is starting to sound like C-A-T, cat, 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 like almost starting to rhyme a little bit with the house pet, with the fern that says meow. So basically, these are just some preliminary things that we've been finding. Even after a year of doing this work, we have to find people, interview them, pull their data, pass it through various pieces of software and see what kind of patterns we're finding. So we obviously need to continue to interview people. And this is one of the reasons why we like to take our show on the road, because we like to meet people who then say, oh, this sounds like an interesting project, sign me up, I'd like to interview with you. The interviews take about 25 minutes. And then as we start to find more data, kind of think about, for example, this sound change. This is just one of many things that we can study with respect to dialect variation in this area. And then also start to combine the different layers together. So how do the grammar patterns interact with the vocabulary patterns, which in turn interact with the sound patterns? How can we take all of these little pieces together and form a bigger, more holistic picture of what dialect variation is in this part of the state, and in comparison, for example, to St. Louis and in Chicago, and indeed, larger regions of the US. So this is really our kind of quick version of our project today. Hopefully you got a bit of interesting information out of this, and hopefully we'll be able to grab some of you at some point soon. We even brought our tape recorders with us today. Okay, somebody has 25 minutes and wants $5 easy from us. But if you don't have time today and you're still interested, we are happy to come find you with our tape recorder. So if you can meet at a certain place at a certain time, we would just set up an appointment and come and do the interview with you then.
And you get $5.
Yeah, you get $5 whole out of this, I know. Yeah, exactly. So, but anyways, thank you for your time today. And we also want to thank, this is a team effort. Without a lot of people on this project, it wouldn't be possible to do what we're doing. And if you don't have time today, you can always send a message to this email, or I can give you a phone number if you're not an emailer, and to set up a time. So thank you again, if you have questions.